Good morning, everybody. Matt Barton here with this week's Broker Minute or Two. Hey, when this national settlement became a thing and we did our training, I think some of the comments we made were there's going to be some learning along the way. And so I wanted to pass along today one of those learnings. Last week, I was involved in a arbitration hearing, and not going to bore you with all the details, but the bottom line was this. The seller had agreed by way of the REPSI to pay an additional amount of compensation. And when it came time to settle, the seller just refused to pay that amount. So that's an interesting situation, right? What do we do at that point? In the past, when compensation was offered by the seller, it was typically through the listing brokerage, right? The listing brokerage has a contract with the seller, and then the listing brokerage would have offered out a compensation by way of the MLS, also known as BBC or BAC. Well, clearly those days are gone. So now when a seller refuses to pay, what do we do? Right? Because if you look at the language in section 4.3E, or you look at the language in the brokerage payment addendum, it's an agreement, it's a contractual agreement from the seller to the buyer's brokerage. It is effectively bypassing the listing broker. And so we really don't have in that specific situation, we don't have a claim against the listing broker anymore. Like, hey, we brought a ready, willing, and able buyer, and you were advertising a certain compensation. Therefore, you, the listing brokerage, are responsible for getting us that money. That's kind of gone. Okay. Unless we use the broker to broker payment agreement. So I'm trying to show you two, compare and contrast. I'm not saying which one is 100% better, but in this situation where the buyer's agent got shorted at closing, they don't have recourse to go to the listing broker. Their only avenue is to go after the seller themselves, because the seller is the one in the REPSI that said, I, the seller, am willing to pay a certain amount to the buyer's brokerage. And so this is my caution. Just go in eyes wide open. If you are putting commissions and compensation in the REPSI, it's kind of on you, right? It's if a seller doesn't pay, you get to be the pursuer, the legal pursuer of those commissions. And so the flip side of that coin is if you want it to be more like the way it used to be, then prior to submitting an offer, get a broker to broker payment agreement signed, because then it's a contract between two brokers, right? And we, as the buyer's brokerage, can turn around and say to the listing broker, we have a contract with you that said you are going to pay X. If that means they have to then go sue their seller, that responsibility is on them. So again, just trying to point out some of the learnings along the way. The reality is most of the time we won't have to pursue a seller for commissions. But my favorite saying in this job is it's never a problem until it's a problem. And when it does become a problem, it tends to be significant. And by the way, if the commission amount that is owed from the seller to the buyer's brokerage is more than $15,000, which is the current threshold, the maximum amount for small claims, then it means you get to go to district court, which, depending on the workload of the court at the time, can be 3, 4, 6 months down the road before you even get your initial hearing, and it's a lot more expensive. So again, I'm not trying to startle anybody, scare anybody, but just point out the pragmatic repercussions, consequences of ensuring our compensation. Broker to broker compensation agreement, which I know is a little more work, and I'd put it in the category of an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, or lose a little negotiating power potentially. And if the seller doesn't pay on commissions in the REPSI, then we get to be the pursuer. I hope that helps. And if you have any specific questions about that, give me a call. Otherwise, have a great week.